Sam, my brother, what has happened to DEI? It was here, it was a thing, and now it seems to be gone. What happened?
Brandon, DEI was put into timeout. And the reality is that one of the reasons why, this is happening, it's because, the federal government, the current administration has been working very, very hard since January of 2025. The very first day, and executive orders like 14151 and 14173 and a number of others, where there have been very specific calls to ending radical and wasteful government DI programs and preferencing and ending illegal discrimination and restoring merit-based opportunity. And for that reason, there's been quite a bit of, retreating in the trenches from this DEI type of work.
Well, let's talk about this merit thing, because on the surface, I think most people would agree. Okay, yeah, you should hire based on merit. And again, it's trading one catchphrase for another. Trading the DEI for merit or whatever. When it's a lot more, what's the word, nuanced than that, right? So what's wrong with if I say, okay, Sam, I don't buy into DEI. I think everybody should just be hired on their merits. What's wrong with that?
So that conversation about merit is a very important conversation because it's very subjective. And I think that's a lot of what we don't even understand. So I'm going to give you a very personal example. When I think about merit, I speak English and I speak Spanish. Sometimes I speak English. And to me, somebody that has merit, particularly if I'm trying to hire somebody for the job, that's one of the first things that I'm going to look for. And maybe if I let my biases run rampant, I'm going to say, if they're not bilingual, maybe they're not as smart as I would like them to be, and maybe I don't want to hire them. And the reality is that maybe I really don't need a bilingual candidate for that job. But because of my own personal experience with what's helped me, make it in my professional career, I'm going to say, I want somebody that speaks English and Spanish, regardless of, whatever the actual role, within the organization requires. So it is very important that we keep in mind that that there is a truth that sometimes we forget. Talent is distributed equally, but opportunity is what a lot of people will find along the way, and that will serve, or not will serve, but there are obstacles to those opportunities.
Do you feel like it's the equity part that people get hung up on? Because I think most people would say, look, I'm good with a diverse group of people in my organization, skill sets, blah, blah, blah. And I want everybody to be included. Do you think it's the equity that some people take issue with?
We know that whatever is not familiar to us, whatever is not like us, we're going to most likely fear. Let's call it what it is. And then you add to that the equity part of it, which you're absolutely right. And if you think about what equity means, it really, it's just leveling the playing field where everybody has the opportunity to participate and have maybe, the same chances to succeed at it. But that in some cases requires that you remove certain systemic obstacles that have been created by legislation, that have been created by socioeconomic limitations, and a number of other obstacles that we've put in the way of some communities.
So it's more about removing obstacles than it is about bringing certain people down to a level. It's more about giving folks opportunities who, based on a number of sociological factors, don't have the opportunity to even get to that place. Is that kind of a little more accurate?
Oh, absolutely. So let's think about, how after we went through civil war, and we started to define exactly who we're going to be as a country, and we started working towards a more equal, or equitable rather country. We struggle. We continue to struggle with giving people, particularly women, the right to vote, because we felt based on a faith, religion, based on the typical social roles that women were given. And then, of course, African Americans and recently freed slaves, we felt that, and it was documented that way, and it was legislated that way, that women and African Americans were second-class citizens. So when for generations, right, you as the mostly white, cisgender, heterosexual male leading in government, in politics, in business, and even in faith, right? Because we do have, documentation of some, denominations barring, African Americans from participating in their services, or even women, serving in the clergy. Then think about how difficult it is to change that chip and say, no, because the way I'm doing it and the way we've always done it is the right way. And you may call it, it's the right way. You may call it, it's my God-given privilege. You may call it whatever you want to call it, but none of it is based on reason. Because there are no reasons why, a woman shouldn't have been given, the right to vote a long time ago, right? Or African Americans should have not been given equitable access to education and economic systems and professional career opportunities the way that were given to everybody else.
Let's talk about this idea that tends to be what I hear in terms of the resistance to this, and that is that when you have diversity, equity, inclusion policies, what you're doing is you're allowing people who are less qualified to take positions that other people are better qualified for, and they're somehow getting a free ride into a place where someone might not have been able to get to. What are your thoughts on that?
Mm-hmm. We've been, as we were preparing for today's conversation, where we're talking about pilots, and I spent 25 years of my professional career with American Airlines. I've been a traveler since I was a little kid, so I put a lot of trust on pilots. And I've probably been on thousands upon thousands of planes, for the majority of my 55 years of existence on this earth. So to me, that's a touchy subject, right? So to see, a female pilot, or maybe a Black pilot, or an Asian pilot, or anything that is not, what we've been accustomed to see, in the cockpit, and to call it a DI hire, it's just highly offensive. But I'm not gonna get offended, and I'm not gonna get, insulted or anything like that. Let's just talk facts. So pilots are required to complete at the very minimum 1,500 hours of flight time, and that is the case for all of them. And you either fly or you don't. And many of them actually, in order for get ahead and get their flying time, they start out not literally as pilots, but as pilot instructors. So they're not only learning how to do it, but they're learning how to teach others how to do it. So you think about a pilot, and you think about whatever the element of diversity that pilot may represent. And to say that they are a DI hire, that is not only ludicrous, but you're actually putting in judgment what I believe are two important things. Number one, the vast majority of pilots, at least in the United States, and it happens in many other countries, they come from a military background. So you're saying that, number one, that the U.S. military is not preparing people properly. And number two, let me just tell you, having worked for an airline, and an airline that at some point went bankrupt and merged, and worked really hard to dig itself out of the financial hole it was at the time, each plane an airline has, whatever airline they have, runs up to, between $40 million to $235 million. Trust me, there's not one CEO, leader of any of these air companies that will put a $235 million piece of equipment in the hands of somebody that is not qualified to do that work. In order for you as a woman, or as an African American male, or as an openly gay, Hispanic male, like myself, the path to get to success in whatever you do is very different. It's very different. And I think it is important that we understand that it's not very different because of who we are, but it's very different because for generations, obstacles to giving people an opportunity to get to those places and spaces have been put into place, because we know now that at certain points in the history of, I don't know, let's talk about universities or sororities or fraternities or, whatever the space or place may be, those spaces and places were held by a very specific group of people that at that time thought, if I open the doors, to these other individuals, then we're no longer going to be, what we originally intended to be.
There goes the
We're
neighborhood.
not going to be up. There goes a neighborhood, right? So, we continue to hang on, Brandon, to these old notions of what certain communities are and what they behave and what they stand for. And that's not the case. But it's not the case because those of us that represent those elements of diversity are different. It's because those that have been historically, traditionally in power have not been willing, have not been courageous enough to say, let me step back for a moment, think through this and say, if this person is fill in the blank, right? Black, Chinese, on a wheelchair, lesbian, whatever that may be, what does that really matter at the end of the day?
Sam, what do you got going on, man? What are your you got a big project? You got something going on that we could promote as we wrap up today?
Yeah, thank you for asking, Brandon. So always, first of all, trying to work on social justice and equity issues and helping colleagues and friends and peers and others, one-on-one or as part of their organizations, to continue to do better. Times are challenging for the diversity, equity, inclusion profession, for the practice. A lot of companies have retreated and they're not, promoting these programs, they're not funding it. February of this year, 22,000 DEI professionals in the federal government were impacted by a reduction in force, in that area. So always, willing to help each other out, right? How do we do this differently so we can continue to do this work and it continue to be appreciated? But I have some very interesting. I have a background in hospitality. I work for a hospitality company, a large multinational hospitality organization, and I've gone back to those roots. So about 2 years ago in Mexico, where I'm currently residing, I had the opportunity to launch the International Boutique Hotel Association. So on those very same concepts of appreciating diversity, the diversity of these smaller hotels, which a lot of people think that they're all luxury hotels. They're not. Some of them are very rustic and they offer, very genuine, experience to their guests. Working on developing a global network of boutique hotels to give them a unique opportunity that they don't get, with the traditional hotel associations and federations in getting the information that they need, the education that they need, and that they understand, that the basic concepts of diversity, equity, inclusion, sustainability, social responsibility in general. DEI is good business. Diversity, equity, inclusion, being an inclusive workplace, being a sustainable workplace, that is business. So learning, all they need to learn in order for them to be successful.
Well, we wish you all the best, my friend, and thank you for being here and giving us some wisdom from someone who has been in the trenches and really knows. And to my friends and people and viewers and listeners who have joined us today, thank you so much. We really appreciate your time being here. And as I always say, feel free to reach out to me. We'd love to talk about training on this topic and others. Obviously, Sam's the go-to on this one, but we have plenty of other training topics at thebrandonwalker.com. Thanks for being here, and we look forward to seeing you next time. Thank you, Sam.
Thank you, Brandon, for the invitation. I like seeing you again and spending some time with you and your audience.
Always a pleasure. Peace and love, folks.